The smell of charcoal and freshly cut grass usually meant happiness, but this year, my 6-year-old daughter's innocent question about skin color ignited a family war that would change everything. My daughter Lily has a superpower. It's not flying or invisibility or any of the cool things she sees in her Saturday morning cartoons. Her superpower is seeing people. I mean, really seeing them. She has this way of looking past all the layers we adults build up. The job titles, the bank accounts, the tired, weary expressions, and seeing the person underneath. To her, the world isn't a complicated mess of social ladders and unspoken rules. It's just a collection of people, some of whom are nice and some of whom aren't, and it's as simple as that. This all came into sharp focus the day Mr. Henderson moved in next door. The old house, which had been empty for a year after Mrs. Gable passed, was suddenly alive with the grunts of movers and the rumble of a large truck. Lily, who was 6 at the time, had her nose pressed against the living room window, her breath fogging up the glass. "Mommy, we have a new neighbor," she announced, as if she were a town crier delivering the most important news of the century. I came and stood behind her, wrapping my arms around her small shoulders. An older gentleman, tall and lean with a crown of brilliant white hair, was directing the movers with a calm, gentle authority. He was black, and in our overwhelmingly white cookie-cutter suburb, I felt a small, shameful knot tighten in my stomach. Not for any reason of my own, but because I knew this neighborhood. I knew the whispers that could start. Lily, of course, saw none of that. She didn't see a black man moving into a white neighborhood. She saw a man with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled at one of the movers. She saw a man who moved with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who had lived a long and full life. "He looks like a king," she whispered, her eyes wide with awe. "A nice king." The next day, while I was weeding my pathetic-looking petunias, Lily saw her chance. Mr. Henderson was in his own front yard, patiently trying to coax a stubborn rose bush back to life. Lily, without a moment's hesitation, marched right up to his fence. "Hello," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "I'm Lily. I'm 6. Are you the new king?" I felt a hot blush creep up my neck, and I was about to rush over and apologize, but Mr. Henderson just chuckled. It was a deep, warm sound that seemed to rumble up from his chest. He turned, and the smile he gave my daughter was one of pure, unadulterated delight. "Well now," he said, his voice like molasses, "I've been called many things in my day, but never a king. It's a pleasure to meet you, Your Highness. I'm just Alistair Henderson." From that day on, they were inseparable. Every afternoon, Lily would finish her homework and then ask, "Can I go see Mr. Henderson?" I'd watch from the kitchen window as he taught her the names of his flowers, how to tell a weed from a seedling, and which bugs were friends to the garden. He'd tell her stories of his late wife, Clara, who had loved gardening more than anything. Lily would listen, completely captivated, occasionally bringing him a glass of lemonade or one of her crayon drawings, which he would accept with the gravity of a diplomat receiving a state gift. He taped every single one of them to his refrigerator. It was idyllic. It was pure. And I knew it couldn't last. The first sign of trouble came, as it always did, from Carol Davison, from 2 houses down. Carol was the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood watch, a woman whose curtains were in a perpetual state of twitching. I saw her watching them one afternoon from her perfectly manicured lawn, her arms crossed, her lips pursed into a thin, disapproving line. Later she casually stopped me by my mailbox. "Sarah," she began, her voice dripping with faux concern, "I just think you need to be careful. You don't really know that man. Letting Lily spend so much time over there, it's just not proper." "He's a lovely man, Carol," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "He's a retired professor and a widower. He's been nothing but kind to Lily." "Still," she sniffed, "people like that. They can bring down the character of the neighborhood. Property values, you know." The thinly veiled racism was so blatant it took my breath away. "People like that?" I repeated, my hand clenching the mail so tightly the envelopes crinkled. Carol just gave me a knowing look and sauntered off, leaving the ugly implication hanging in the air between us. The knot in my stomach was back, colder and heavier this time. A week later, a letter appeared in every mailbox on the street. It was a notice for an emergency homeowners association meeting, to be held at Carol's house. The topic: to discuss recent concerns regarding neighborhood safety and upholding community standards. I knew exactly who and what that was about. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just whispers anymore. This was a declaration of war. And Mr. Henderson was the target. I spent the next 2 days in a state of simmering rage. I wanted to march over to Mr. Henderson's, show him the letter, and say, Look at the ugliness you're facing. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. His garden was his sanctuary, a peaceful world he was building in memory of his wife. How could I be the one to poison it with the neighborhood's petty hatred? It felt like telling a child there was a monster under their bed. You don't do it, even if it's true. You just stand guard. So I decided I would go to that meeting and I would be his guard. My husband, Mark, was on a business trip, so I was on my own. It felt fitting somehow. This was my street, my fight. The night of the meeting, I tucked Lily into bed, reading her an extra story about a brave knight who defends a friendly dragon from scared villagers. She fell asleep with a peaceful smile on her face, completely oblivious to the real-life version of her story playing out just 2 houses down. I left the baby monitor on my nightstand, the volume turned up high, and walked over to Carol's. Her living room was a sea of beige and passive aggression. About 15 of my neighbors were crammed onto her pristine couches and folding chairs she'd brought up from the basement. The air was thick with the scent of cheap air freshener and sanctimony. Carol, holding a clipboard like a scepter, called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice radiating a smug sense of importance. "As you know, our community has always prided itself on its cohesion, its safety. We look out for one another. But recently, a new element has been introduced, and I know some of you have expressed concerns." She didn't have to say his name. Everyone knew. Tom from across the street, a man who obsessively polished his oversized SUV every Saturday, cleared his throat. My wife said she saw him just watching, sitting on his porch for hours just watching the kids play in the street. It's strange. Strange? He's a retired man, Tom. He's probably lonely, I snapped, my voice cutting through the polite murmurings. Every head turned to me. I could feel their collective judgment wash over me. I was the dissenter, the traitor. Carol gave me a tight, condescending smile. "Sarah, we appreciate your perspective, but you have to understand we don't know anything about him. He has no local ties. He just appeared. For all we know, he could have a record. We have a right to protect our children and our investments." The investments part hung in the air, the ugly, unspoken word floating just beneath it. Property values. This wasn't about safety. It was about money and prejudice wrapped in a flimsy blanket of parental concern. "His name is Alistair Henderson," I said, my voice shaking slightly with fury. "He was a history professor at the university for 40 years. His wife, Clara, passed away last winter, and he moved here to be closer to her sister, who lives over in the next town. He has no record, unless you count a late library book in 1978. He is kind and gentle, and he is teaching my daughter about hydrangeas. Is there anything else you'd like to know, or shall we just get to the real reason we're all here?" The room went dead silent. My directness had shattered their comfortable illusion of civility. Carol's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. "That is entirely uncalled for," she hissed. "This has nothing to do with race." A chorus of mumbled agreements went through the room. "Of course not. It's about safety." No one's saying that. They were liars, every single one of them. "Then what is it about?" I challenged, my voice rising. "What has he actually done?" No one had an answer. They just looked at their feet, at the ceiling, anywhere but at me. Finally, Carol, recovering her composure, played her trump card. "It's about upholding community standards," she said, her voice turning cold and hard. "Several of us have reviewed the HOA bylaws. There are covenants about property appearance and nuisance behavior. We will be watching. Every blade of grass, every late-night light. We will document everything. We will make it clear that he is not a good fit. Perhaps he'll be encouraged to find a community that's more suitable." The threat was vile and unmistakable. They were going to harass an old man, bury him in petty violations and complaints until he broke. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked around at the faces of my neighbors' people I'd shared block party burgers with, people who'd waved to me every morning, and I saw only a mob. Just as I opened my mouth to tell them exactly what I thought of their disgusting little plan, we all heard it. A faint creak from the front door. Everyone turned. Standing in the entryway, backlit by the porch light, was a small figure in pink unicorn pajamas, clutching a piece of paper. It was Lily. Her eyes were wide, blinking in the sudden brightness of the living room. She must have woken up and, seeing me gone, come looking for me. She scanned the room of silent, staring adults until her eyes found mine. Then she held up the drawing she was holding. It was a picture of a stick figure king with a brilliant white crayon crown, standing next to a little girl in a garden of colorful scribbles. "I had a bad dream," she said, her voice a tiny whisper in the cavernous silence. "Is Mr. Henderson okay? You were talking so loud." She looked around at the grim, hostile faces, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Why are you all so angry at the nice king?" The smell of charcoal and freshly cut grass was supposed to be the scent of happiness. For years it had been. Our annual family barbecue was a tradition I cherished, a day of questionable burger flipping skills, ice-cold drinks, and the sound of my daughter's laughter chasing the dog around the yard. This year felt different. There was a low hum of tension beneath the surface, a discordant note in an otherwise perfect summer symphony. My wife Sarah felt it too. I could see it in the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she bustled around, arranging salads on the picnic table. The source of that tension was standing by the grill with me, holding a beer and pontificating about property taxes. My father. And standing on the other side of the lawn, teaching our 6-year-old daughter Lily a complicated secret handshake, was the reason for my father's quiet disapproval. My brother-in-law, Marcus. Marcus is one of the best men I know. He's kind, wickedly smart, and he adores his niece. When he and Sarah's sister Chloe got married, I couldn't have been happier to officially call him my brother. My father, however, well, my father is from a different generation. A generation that used words like tradition and heritage as polite shields for less savory opinions. He'd never said anything overtly hostile about Marcus, who is black, but his prejudice was a language spoken in silences, in stiff handshakes that ended too quickly, in questions that were just a little too pointed. "Where are your people really from, Marcus?" he'd asked once at Christmas, and the entire room had frozen. Today Lily was oblivious to all of it. In her world, Marcus was just Uncle Marcus, her partner in crime, the co-captain of their imaginary starship, the one who could make monster noises better than anyone. I watched them now, their heads bent together in concentration, their hands twisting into their secret greeting before they both exploded in a fit of giggles. Lily's laugh was pure, unadulterated joy, and for a moment it drowned out the knot in my stomach. "She really likes him," my father grunted, his eyes fixed on the scene. It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation laced with something I couldn't quite decipher. Concern? Resignation? "He's her uncle, Dad. Of course she does. He's great with her." I flipped a burger, a little too forcefully, and grease spat back at me. "Still," he said, taking a long sip of his beer, "it's important she understands. You know, how the world works." I knew exactly what he meant. He meant the world as he saw it. A world of lines and divisions, of us and them. It was the same talk he'd tried to have with me when I was a kid, a talk I'd never fully understood and had grown to resent. The afternoon wore on. We ate, we talked, we pretended everything was normal. But the tension simmered. It came to a head when Marcus, at Sarah's request, went to put on some music. He chose a classic soul playlist, smooth and upbeat. James Brown started crooning from the portable speaker, and Lily immediately started dancing on the grass, a whirlwind of pigtails and flailing limbs. Marcus joined her, a wide grin on his face as they moved in a silly, uncoordinated rhythm. My father's face tightened. "Can't we listen to some real music?" he muttered, just loud enough for me and Sarah to hear. Sarah stiffened beside me. "This is real music, Dad," she said, her voice tight. It's just noise, he waved a dismissive hand. All that shouting. The comment hung in the air, thick and ugly. Marcus, who had heard it, stopped dancing. His smile faltered. He glanced over at my father, his expression unreadable, then looked down at Lily, who was still bopping along to the beat, oblivious. With a gentle sigh, he walked over to the speaker. He didn't make a scene. He just quietly faded the music out and put on some classic rock that my father always requested. A small act of peacemaking that broke my heart. He was a guest in our home, and he was the one trying to keep the peace. The rest of the family tried to fill the ensuing silence with forced chatter, but the damage was done. The joy had been punctured. Lily, however, didn't understand the sudden shift. She just knew the fun had stopped. She ran over to where my father was now sitting in a lawn chair, looking smugly satisfied. "Grandpa," she said, her little brow furrowed, "why did you make Uncle Marcus turn off the music? We were dancing." My father patted his knee. "Come here, sweetheart. That music was... well, it's not for us. It's his music." Lily tilted her head, a picture of pure confusion. She looked from my father over to Marcus, who was now standing awkwardly by the drink cooler, trying to pretend he wasn't the center of a silent storm. Her gaze was so intense, so analytical, it was as if she were trying to solve a complex puzzle. She saw her smiling, fun uncle, and she saw her grumpy grandpa, and she saw the invisible wall that had just been erected between them. She turned back to my father, her voice small but clear, cutting through the strained quiet of the backyard. "But why can't it be our music too?" My father sighed, a sound of weary exasperation. "It's complicated, Lilybug. When you're older, you'll understand. Some things are just for different kinds of people." He said it so casually, as if he were explaining why dogs can't eat chocolate. But I saw Marcus flinch. I saw Sarah's hands clench into fists. I felt a hot surge of anger rise in my own chest. But before any of us could speak, before we could detonate the bomb my father had just so casually rolled onto the lawn, Lily spoke again. Her eyes, wide and innocent, were locked on my father's. She wasn't being defiant. She wasn't being accusatory. She was genuinely, heartbreakingly bewildered. "I don't understand racism," she declared, not as a statement, but as a confession of confusion. The silence that followed was absolute. Every cricket, every distant car, every breath seemed to stop. My father's face, which had been set in a mask of stubborn righteousness, crumpled slightly. He stared at his 6-year-old granddaughter as if he'd never seen her before. I knelt beside her, my heart pounding. "What do you mean, sweetie?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lily pointed a small, steady finger at Marcus, then swiveled it to point at my father. "Uncle Marcus's skin is brown. Your skin is white. They're just colors, like my crayons." She looked back at my father, her expression pleading for an explanation that made sense in her world. "I don't get it. Why is one color better than the other?" My father's face was a cracked vase, the certainty that had held him together for 70 years suddenly splintering. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The usual platitudes, the tired old excuses about how things are, died on his lips. How do you explain a lifetime of baked-in prejudice to a child holding a fistful of crayons? How do you justify a worldview that makes no logical sense? He looked from Lily to me, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes, as if begging me to rescue him. But I wasn't going to. Not this time. Sarah was the first to move. She walked over and knelt beside Lily, wrapping an arm around our daughter's small shoulders. But her eyes, cold and sharp as shards of ice, were locked on my father. "She asked you a question, Dad," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Why is one color better than the other?" Chloe, Sarah's sister, had moved to stand beside Marcus, a silent, unshakable wall of support. Marcus himself hadn't moved a muscle, but his posture had changed. He was no longer trying to make himself small. He stood tall, watching, his expression a mixture of pain and weary resignation, as if he'd seen this exact scene play out 100 times before. And he probably had. "Now, Sarah, don't twist things," my father finally stammered, finding his voice. He tried to muster his usual blustering authority, but it came out weak and thin. Nobody said better. I just said, different. It's just different. No, I said, stepping forward. The knot in my stomach had dissolved, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. That's not what you said, Dad. You said his music wasn't for us. You implied his culture, was separate and other. Lily just cut through the nonsense and asked why. So tell her. Explain the difference. Use small words. We're all listening. My challenge hung in the air. The smell of the burgers charring on the grill was suddenly acrid and suffocating. My father's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He was cornered, not by angry adults, but by the devastatingly simple logic of a 6-year-old. He felt the trap closing and did what cornered people always do. He lashed out. "This is what you get," he spat, his voice rising. He wasn't looking at Lily anymore. He was glaring at me, at Sarah. "This is what happens when you fill her head with all this politically correct garbage. You're confusing her. A child shouldn't be thinking about these things." "She's not confused, Dad," Sarah shot back, standing up. "She sees things perfectly clearly. She sees a man she loves, her uncle, and she sees her grandfather being mean to him for no reason. You're the one who's confused if you think there's any good reason for it." "I was not being mean," he bellowed, getting to his feet. The last vestiges of a peaceful family barbecue had now utterly evaporated. "I was just stating a fact. They have their culture, we have ours. Why is that so hard for you people to understand? Why do you have to mix everything all up?" And then he made his fatal mistake. He turned and pointed a trembling finger at Marcus. "This all started when he came into the picture. We were a normal family before all this." A gasp escaped Chloe's lips. Sarah looked like she was ready to physically launch herself across the lawn. But it was the look on Marcus's face that shattered me. For the first time, the weary resignation was gone, replaced by a deep, profound hurt. He had endured the coded language, the dismissive tone, the general unpleasantness, all in the name of family peace. But this was different. This was a direct accusation. He was being blamed for a poison that my father had been carrying his whole life. I saw my daughter's face. Her lower lip was trembling. She was looking at her grandpa, this man she had loved unconditionally, and seeing a stranger, a mean, angry stranger who was hurting her uncle. She was learning the lesson my father had wanted her to learn, just not in the way he intended. She was learning what prejudice looked like. She was learning what it felt like. Something inside me snapped. It was a clean, final break. The part of me that had always tried to excuse him, to understand him, to hope he would change, simply ceased to exist. In its place was nothing but the fierce, primal instinct of a father protecting his child's world from being poisoned. I walked past my father without looking at him. I went to the grill and turned off the gas. The hiss died, and the silence that returned was heavier than before. I turned around and faced him. My voice was calm, devoid of the anger that was raging inside me. It was the calm of a final decision. "This is my family, Dad," I said, gesturing to Sarah, Lily, Chloe, and Marcus. "All of them. This is my home, and in my home, we don't treat people like that. We don't blame them for the color of their skin. We don't make them feel unwelcome." I took a breath. This was it. The point of no return. "I think it's time for you to go." My father stared at me, his mouth agape. Disbelief warred with fury on his face. You're kicking me out. Your own father. For him?" He gestured wildly towards Marcus again. "I'm asking you to leave because you were cruel to a member of my family, in my home, in front of my daughter," I said, my voice like stone. "Who it was doesn't matter. What you did does." He stood there for a long moment, his chest heaving. The entire yard was frozen. He looked at me, his son, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Pure, unadulterated hatred. He opened his mouth, and the words he spoke weren't shouted. They were delivered in a low, venomous hiss that was far more terrifying than any yell. "You've made your choice," he whispered. "Don't you dare come crawling back to me when you realize what you've just thrown away. And don't think for a second I'm going to let this go." He took a step towards the gate, then paused, turning to look directly at Sarah. "And as for you, there are other ways to lose a family. My father's threat hung in the air like toxic smoke. It was vague, shapeless, yet filled with a chilling menace. There are other ways to lose a family. What did that even mean? He stared at Sarah for a moment longer, a look of cold triumph on his face, before turning on his heel and storming out of the backyard, slamming the gate shut behind him with a crack that made us all jump. The sound echoed in the sudden, deafening quiet. For a moment nobody moved. We were all statues in a tableau of a shattered afternoon. Then Lily, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide, terrified eyes, burst into tears. It wasn't a child's tantrum. It was the sound of genuine heartbreak, a wrenching sob that came from a place of deep confusion and fear. Sarah rushed to her, scooping her up into a hug and murmuring soothing words, her own face pale and shaken. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Marcus. I turned to look at him, my mind a chaotic whirl of anger, regret, and a strange, hollow victory. "Man, I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I never wanted to cause—" "Don't," I cut him off, my voice rougher than I intended. "Don't you dare apologize. You did nothing. This is on him. It's been festering for years. It was bound to happen." "Still," Chloe said, wrapping an arm around Marcus's waist, her expression fierce, "to say that to you, Sarah, in front of your daughter. What a monster." We spent the next hour in a daze, cleaning up the wreckage of the barbecue. The half-eaten burgers and untouched salads felt like relics from another lifetime. We tried to talk, to piece things together, but the conversation was stilted and strange. Lily had cried herself into an exhausted sleep in Sarah's arms, her peaceful face a stark contrast to the turmoil she had unleashed. My father's final words kept replaying in my mind. It wasn't an idle threat. My father was a man who held grudges like treasures, who believed in retribution. He was a retired accountant, a creature of ledgers and balances, and in his mind I had just created a massive imbalance, a debt he would feel compelled to collect. The next 2 weeks were eerily quiet. We didn't hear a word from him. My mom called once, her voice strained and unhappy. She told me I had broken my father's heart, that I needed to be the bigger person and apologize. I told her there was nothing to apologize for. The conversation ended with her in tears, and me feeling like I'd just twisted the knife further. But what was I supposed to do? Apologize for defending my family? Apologize for telling my daughter that racism is wrong? It felt like a trap with no right answer. Sarah was a rock, unwavering in her support. "We did the right thing," she kept telling me, holding my hand late at night when the silence of the house felt too loud. "Don't you dare second-guess it." But I could see the worry etched around her eyes. She kept her phone close, jumping slightly every time it rang. My father's threat had been aimed at her, and it had landed. Then things started to happen. Small things at first. A letter arrived from our homeowners association citing us for a violation. The small shed in our backyard, which had been there for 5 years without a single complaint, was apparently half an inch too close to the property line. The complaint had been filed anonymously. A week later, Sarah, who works from home as a freelance graphic designer, had 2 of her oldest clients suddenly and inexplicably drop her. They were vague, mentioning budget cuts and restructuring, but their emails were cold and final. It was a significant financial hit. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence. The world was a random place. Bad things happened. But the pattern was unsettling. It felt targeted. It felt like my father's work. He knew our neighborhood inside and out. He knew the petty tyrants on the HOA board. He had contacts everywhere from his decades of work in the community. He was a man who knew how to pull strings, how to apply pressure in ways that couldn't easily be traced back to him. The real blow came on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah got a call. I was in the garage trying to fix a leaky faucet when I heard her shriek my name. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a raw, panicked cry that sent ice water through my veins. I dropped my wrench and sprinted inside. I found her in the living room, standing by the window, her phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip. Her face was ashen. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. "What is it? What's wrong?" I demanded, my heart hammering against my ribs. She couldn't speak. She just shook her head, holding the phone out to me. On the screen was a news article from a local website. The headline made the blood drain from my face. Local school, volunteer under investigation amid disturbing allegations. Beneath the headline was a picture of Sarah. It was the photo from her professional website, a smiling, friendly headshot. My eyes scanned the text, my brain struggling to process the words. Anonymous sources, concerned parents, inappropriate conduct, an official investigation by Child Protective Services. It was a smear piece, a character assassination built on whispers and shadows, but it was brutally effective. Sarah volunteered at Lily's elementary school twice a week, reading to the first graders. It was one of the great joys of her life, and someone was trying to turn it into something monstrous. Who would do this? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. This was it. This was what he meant. There are other ways to lose a family. He wasn't trying to break us up. He was trying to destroy Sarah's reputation, to isolate her, to take away the community and life she had built. He was trying to take our daughter away. They're coming here, Sarah choked out, her voice barely audible. CPS. They're coming to the house, to interview Lily. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it stole my breath. They think I could hurt our daughter. He did this. Your father did this. The doorbell rang. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. We both froze, staring at the door as if a monster was on the other side. It rang again, longer this time, more insistent. A car with an official government seal was parked at our curb. My father had just crossed a line from which there was no return. He had weaponized the state against his own family. He hadn't just thrown a bomb onto our lawn. He had planted it in the heart of our home, and it was about to go off. That doorbell felt like a death knell. My first instinct was to barricade the door, to grab Sarah and Lily and just run. But we weren't criminals. Running would only make us look guilty. Taking a deep breath, I put my arm around Sarah's trembling shoulders and walked to the door. We will get through this, I murmured, trying to project a confidence I absolutely did not feel. 2 women stood on our doorstep, their expressions professionally neutral, but their eyes sharp and assessing. They introduced themselves as Ms. Albright and Ms. Davis from Child Protective Services. They were polite, but their presence felt like an invasion, a contamination of the one place we were supposed to feel safe. They explained they'd received a serious, albeit anonymous, tip, and were required by law to investigate. The next hour was the longest of my life. They separated us. Miss Albright took Sarah into the kitchen while Miss Davis spoke to me in the living room. Her questions were a disorienting blend of the mundane and the monstrous. How would you describe your wife's relationship with your daughter? Has she ever exhibited signs of a short temper? Are you aware of any unusual disciplinary methods? Each question felt like a carefully placed mine, and I had to navigate the field with painstaking care, my answers calm and deliberate, even as a volcano of rage at my father threatened to erupt. But the worst part was when they asked to speak to Lily. Alone. Sarah's face crumpled, but we had no choice. We had to trust that the simple, unvarnished truth of our daughter's love for her mother would be enough. We watched as the kindly-faced Miss Albright led our 6-year-old into her own playroom and closed the door. Sarah collapsed onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she let out a choked, helpless sob. While they were in there, my mind raced. An anonymous tip. This was my father's M.O. He was an accountant, a man of paper trails and plausible deniability. He wouldn't have called himself. He would have manipulated someone else into doing it, a concerned friend or a disgruntled neighbor, feeding them lies couched in concern. But he wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was an arrogant, angry old man. And arrogant men make mistakes. When Miss Albright and Lily finally emerged from the playroom 20 minutes later, Lily was smiling. She was holding a piece of paper she'd drawn for her new friend. The social worker's professional mask had softened into a genuine, warm smile. She knelt down. "You have a wonderful mommy, Lily," she said gently. "Don't you ever forget that." Relief washed over me so intensely, my knees felt weak. Miss Albright and Miss Davis convened in our entryway. "It's clear there's a loving, stable home here," Miss Albright said, her tone now reassuring. The allegations seemed to be completely unfounded, malicious even. Frankly, we get calls like this sometimes. People using our agency to settle personal scores. It's despicable. As they were preparing to leave, I took a leap of faith. I think I know who might be behind this, I said, my voice steady. It stems from a recent and very ugly family argument. Is there any way to know where the call originated from? Ms. Davis shook her head. I'm sorry, that information is confidential. I understand, I said. But the man I suspect, my father, is a retiree. He spends most of his time at the local senior center. He likes to play cards there, hold court. He's very proud of his connections. I was fishing, casting a line into the dark, but it was all I had. I watched their faces for any flicker of recognition. Nothing. They thanked us, apologized for the intrusion, and left. As soon as their car pulled away, I turned to Sarah. He used someone, I said. He got one of his old cronies to make the call for him, someone he thought was loyal. Sarah looked at me, confused. How does that help us? Because loyalties can change, I said, a plan beginning to form in the chaos of my mind. It was a long shot, but it was better than sitting here, waiting for his next attack. The next day I went to the senior center. It smelled of boiled vegetables and stale coffee. I found my father holding court at a card table, just as I knew he would be. He saw me, and a smug, hateful look crossed his face. He thought I was there to beg. I ignored him and walked over to another table where a man named George was sitting alone, nursing a cup of tea. George had worked with my father for 30 years. I'd known him my whole life. He was a meek man, easily led, and utterly terrified of my father's temper. He was also, I was betting, a decent man at his core. I sat down opposite him. "Hello, George," he started, nearly spilling his tea. "Oh, hello, Michael. I didn't expect to see you here." He wouldn't meet my eye. "George," I said, my voice low and calm, "CPS visited my family yesterday. Someone made a false report, a malicious one, the kind of report that could get a man in a lot of trouble for filing. Obstruction of justice, perjury, serious stuff." George went pale. His hands began to shake. I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do, George. I think my father put you up to it. I think he told you some lies about my wife, played on your sympathies, and got you to make a phone call for him." I leaned forward, my eyes boring into his. "My father is a bully, George. You know that better than anyone. He uses people, and when they get in trouble, he lets them take the fall. Do you really think he'll protect you when the investigators start looking into who made that call? Because they are looking." It was a bluff, but a good one. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the fear of my father warring with the fear of prison. I saw the conscience he had, buried under decades of intimidation. He told me he was worried about Lily," George stammered, his voice a pathetic whisper. "He said Sarah was unstable. He lied to you, George, and he used you to try and destroy my family." I stood up. "You have a choice. You can continue to protect the man who just used you like a pawn, or you can do the right thing. You can go to the police, you can go back to CPS, and you can tell them the truth." I left him there, a shattered man at a lonely table. I didn't know if it would work, but I had planted a seed of doubt, a seed of self-preservation. 2 days later, my mother called me, hysterical. The police had shown up at their door. George had confessed everything. My father was being charged with filing a false report and conspiracy. His face was all over the local news website, not as a pillar of the community, but as a bitter old man who tried to weaponize the state against his own family. His reputation, the thing he valued above all else, was in ashes. The HOA violation was dropped. Sarah's clients, having seen the news and realizing the smear campaign for what it was, called to apologize and reinstate their contracts. We didn't gloat. There was no victory in it, only a profound sadness for a relationship that was now irrevocably destroyed. He had tried to take our family, and in the end, he was the one who had lost his. That weekend, we invited Marcus and Chloe over. We put on the same soul playlist, and as James Brown's voice filled the backyard, Lily grabbed my hand and her Uncle Marcus's hand. "Let's dance," she said, her smile as bright as the summer sun. And we did. We danced on the grass, a mess of flailing limbs and joyful laughter, our little circle whole and unbroken. Lily's gaze, the one that had started it all, was pure and happy. She didn't understand racism, and maybe that was the point. In her beautifully simple world, you didn't need to understand poison to know that love was the antidote.